Day 4 of tip tanks. Anthony was here working because I was out dropping my kids off, and this is the progress. So he has clecoed in this end rib cap, and so he's getting it all set up, setting some screws from the original screw to dial it in, hold it in place for tension. You can see those screws right there, but we're not going to use those screws. We got to drill new holes for all the bolts and everything that are going to go in, and they need to be at least a minimum of 1 inch away from those existing ones. So maybe that's what he's already started, actually, is setting in new ones, I guess. I'm not sure, but we're going to find out what's happening. He's pulled the wire through, everything. Cool. Here's Anthony getting the end cap riveted in. He's pressing all those pieces in so it secures and holds it in place. This is when the heat dome was starting to pick up and getting pretty hot in the hangar. Definitely appreciate your mechanics and bring them some tasty frosty beverages from time to time if you want them to keep you in their good graces, because it is no joke working without air conditioning in these types of setups during the summertime, and let alone the cold too. So using different tools because of the angles and trying to get through is challenging. There's different ways to do it. Here's a look at this far side on the right wing for the same spar. So all the clecos are in there to get it all lined up in place. Again, you may want to open that hole a little bit wider, that additional hole, the biggest one right there, as much as you can. So here we are starting to do some of our measurements, figuring out where things are, cleaning out the holes, reaming them there, making sure everything's nice and lined up. It really is an impressive setup to go, oh, this will all hold 15 gallons on each side, sticking way out there. Anthony's checking the depth and the size of those holes to make sure they're going to fit the right size rivets. So here I am continuing his work after he showed me how to do it. So doing some of the reaming and positioning, and then getting in there for cleaning it up. Obviously you don't want a bunch of gnarly bits in there. Now we're setting up to test the wingtip and support it with those jacks to align it and get some measurements of where we're going to be drilling through the fiberglass. It's really essential on this part that you check and get the wingtip as in line with the rest of the airfoil as possible, because you don't want it to be cantered up or cantered down. And it's really easy to have that happen if you don't have it set just right. So now we're still fitting it on, and I jumped to show you where I was underneath and drilling, and that was a little bit out of order. But now we've got it on there, and we're taking that long straight edge and making sure it's an actual straight edge is essential. And I think that piece was slightly bowed, so we ended up grabbing a different piece of metal because we didn't trust that wood. So we went off, hunted for another piece, looking around, finding a sheet of metal that we could trust a bit more. And then we used that for measuring off and checking to ensure that it was the right level. And you can see how much it slightly tweaks with just those movements. A little bit of pressure, moving the wing. We're looking at it, making sure it looks good, and it does so far. Small tweaks again. You really want it to get just right, because you only get one shot at doing this, or maybe you get 2 shots, but just know that if you get the second shot, it's going to cost you, which may foreshadow something that happened. So we're laying out some tape, blue tape like that, and then that gives us the opportunity to sync up and identify where we're going to be marking for drilling our holes, because we need to set that up first, and then we can go through and test out where everything is. And so we put this tape on, and we're like, all right, so now we're gonna mark off so we know where our screw holes are, and then detail how that's gonna work. So now we need to get this thing on and off. Mike's coming over to give us some moral support. We're really getting in as far as we possibly can because there's only about 3/4 inch of overlap on the wings, and thinking again that 15 gallons plus the weight of the wingtip are floating out there. We really want to make sure it's going to work. Plus we also have the vent line that's supposed to go through and match up where all the wires are going to go through for the senders. There's a lot to consider. You got your nav lights that are coming through. So it's definitely a lot of moving parts and components that you gotta factor in when doing this install. And this being both of our first time always adds a new level of complexity for that. Checking out what everything is looking like right now. Testing off some more measurements. And as you can see, there's lots of considerations. We've got clearance on the aileron. That's also got to be cleared. How are we going to get back and attach the bolts in the far back? Just confirming with the millimeter tool exactly where our lines are. And so this is where I'm now marking the distance that the inset is for where we need to go onto that masking tape. And that way, as I know what the distance is, because you're not going to know or see where the lines are when you're finally drilling through the fiberglass on the tip tank. So again, we're putting it back on, getting it settled exactly where it needs to be. And again, this is where you don't want to rush things or get it wrong for the level. Now I am cleaning up some of the edges with this angle grinder, making sure that there's no sharp burrs or anything that's going to cause a stress point or catch on anything and wear with time, make it worse. So now Anthony is giving me a cutting tool, and what we're going to be working on is making sure that that portion where it kind of comes in a little bit on the tip tank has room on the existing leading edge to fit. And there can be a chamfer cut or it can be a square cut. It was just way easier to make the square cut. So now we've got it masked off the depth that I want, and pretty much I'm going to cut up to that line with that cutting tool. Here I am taking my time, moving as slowly as possible. You can only cut once. And this tool is really useful. Did a good job of cutting it and then doing some light polishing, sanding down the edges, make sure there's no sharp edges, and that's the final result. So you just need to do that on both sides to give way and have clearance for that inner piece that's part of the channel that allows for the wire to go out to the leading edge. So see that little pathway? That's what you're setting up a clearance for, to make sure that that's available. Now here's where things went a little wrong. Notice how I've got my elbow on the tip and I'm drilling these holes. We're not checking to make sure that the tip is still level. I'm close, I'm not walking back, I'm not looking at it from a distance, no one else is. I'm leaning over it. All things that you don't want to do if you're gonna install one of these yourselves. So what we're doing is we are measuring. I am getting access and clearance, and you have to drill with a smaller drill so you don't screw up all the threads that are on the inside, and work your way back and hope that you don't make the mistake that we ended up making in installing this one. At least we didn't do it to both of them and then realize the mistake. But this is something that you really want to take caution around to ensure that it's gonna be done right. Because like I said, this is fiberglass and you are decreasing its integrity every time you put a hole in it. You want to make sure that you're not having to put multiple holes in it. It is repairable in time if you have to do what we ended up having to do, which was re-fiberglass our holes that we put in and set it up. So here we are, finally getting everything dialed in and set up on the tip tank, measuring, confirming where some of those distances are, those holes, drilling another pilot hole, reaming it out, and then installing the screws. Everything's just finger tight, doesn't have to be super intense. This is the moment of truth. We take off the pressure because now top and bottom we put in all of our screws, move it out of the way. And something that I also realized that you don't want to do is leave the plastic on while you're installing it, because it also makes for some visual challenges when you're trying to ensure that it's level. And this is where I start realizing, it's not level. It looks like the tip's up. Oh boy. I'm just hoping from the front that it doesn't look that way, and Anthony's looking at it. We both start looking at it going, boy, that's not right. And we drilled the holes. Great. Now what are we gonna do? Can we fix it? Is there wiggle room? Is there play? And at this point we start realizing, yeah, not sure really what the best solution is gonna be. Trying to get different angles on it, confirm that it's slightly off. Yep, sure is. And even in the instructions it says that you want neither up nor down. It's on there secure. It's definitely impressive, and that's even without really cinching down all the screws. But you want to take caution to measure a bunch of times, ensure you're not putting any weight down on the airfoil or the tip, and that before you drill, you're super confirming that there's nothing off with where the placement and the angle of that tip is. Anthony's here working on the rest of just checking to see where we were off with that straight edge. So hopefully this is a good lesson for you if you are installing the Flint Aero tip tanks on your 206 or any of the other aircraft that allow for the tip tank extensions, to not make the same mistake. Now, we ended up having Rudy and Lee do some good fiberglass work to give us fresh new fiberglass to then redo this the proper way. And once we learned our lesson on this tip, we made sure that we didn't have the same issue happen on the left one, and we were able to get that installed. But that was the end of day 4 for getting the tip tanks installed. I think the heat was getting to us first time. It was good that we were able to not have this happen on both of them at the same time, but it definitely started making us go, oh boy, what's the solution? What's the solution? We hadn't quite fully figured it out at this moment, kind of more in that state of, oh boy, that's just a real bummer. But not the end of the world, and so far so good with our current install with the tip tanks and the new fiberglass. So it's not the end of the world, just ideally you don't want to have it happen in the first place.